Do you believe that someone who once loved you deeply could come back after 20 years, when you are no longer the naive girl you once were, but a woman seasoned by life, carrying both faith and doubt in her heart? Do you believe that a love once buried in memory could rise again, not in a fairy tale, but in the chaos of real life, amidst class divides and calculated ambition? The story you're about to read doesn't begin with a sweet date. It starts with a startled glance between a successful doctor and a woman mopping the hospital floor. They once had everything, then lost it all, then met again. Can a broken past become the foundation for a new future? Stay until the end, because what you're about to read isn't just a love story. It's a rebirth of trust, of dignity, and of real love between two imperfect people. On a late October evening, under the soft golden glow of the Empire Grand Hotel lobby in Boston, the 10th anniversary celebration of the Grant Care Health Hospital chain was held in grandeur. Candlelight flickered, champagne-filled crystal glasses. Classical music floated through the air, wrapping the room in a kind of elegance only those who have lived through half a lifetime can appreciate. The beauty of slowness, of silence amid a crowd. Among the elegantly dressed guests, Mrs. Isabella Grant, CEO of the hospital system, entered with the composure of a woman who had long learned to stand calm in every storm. Her posture was upright, her elegant black dress striking the perfect balance between modesty and authority. At 41, she no longer needed to speak much to command attention. And yet, she froze, because of a small sound, a soft clicking from the electric system behind the stage. At that exact moment, tucked in an unnoticed corner, a man in a gray-blue technician's uniform was crouched beneath the stage lights, tightening a wrench, sweat beading on his forehead as the auxiliary AC unit failed to kick in. A faint name on his uniform, Nathaniel Hayes, flickered into view under the golden light. In just a moment, time stopped for Isabella. Her hand loosened around the wine glass, her palm turning cold as if her body recognized something before her mind did. That face, those features, that forehead, now lined with a few more creases, but still shaped exactly like the man who had once been everything to her. 20 years ago, when they were 18-year-old lovers by a summer creek in Montana. No way, Isabella whispered to herself, barely audible. As if the universe understood the tremor in her soul, Nathaniel looked up, and at that moment, their eyes met. No smile, no greeting, just a gaze crashing into silence, like two people seeing their past selves again. The versions of them who once dreamed, once dared to promise. The stage lights flicked on. The host began the opening speech. The party continued as if nothing had happened. But inside Isabella Grant, the world was no longer the same, and she knew tonight would not end with applause. About an hour later, after the speech, and as the crowd drifted toward the buffet, Isabella left the VIP table. No one called after her. No one stopped her. They all assumed that, at events like these, even the head of the empire might need a quiet moment alone. But no one knew her heart was racing, not from pride or achievement, but from the ghost of a man who had just reappeared from the past. She hurried down the corridor behind the stage, where backstage staff were packing up wires and equipment boxes. The air smelled of sweat, fabric dust, and floor disinfectant. But Isabella didn't notice. All she saw was a figure hunched over the steel rig, still Nathaniel Hayes. She stood just a few steps behind him. Her hand clenched her leather purse, her breathing uneven, like someone who had been running. At last, in a low voice, trembling, from emotion she couldn't yet name, anger, regret, or sorrow, she spoke, "Nathaniel?" He jolted and turned around. Under the cold neon lights, his face came into sharper focus. No longer the poor teenager in a worn-out shirt who used to bike through fields to take her to summer dances. Before her stood a man in his 40s, shoulders slightly hunched from labor, dark hair streaked with gray. But those eyes, that deep brown, were still the same. He was silent, then nodded. Isabella. One word, but it summoned a whole youth they had buried under choices, crossroads, and sacrifices neither of them had ever dared to revisit. "How did you?" she stumbled, trying to steady her breath. "How are you here?" Nathaniel glanced up at the ceiling as if hoping it held a softer truth. But finally he gave a small, sad smile, no longer the smile of a dreamer. "I work for the subcontractor. Lighting, wiring, stuff like that. They called me to set up the stage system this afternoon. I come in, I leave. No one knows. No one cares." Isabella swallowed hard, something close to guilt rising in her chest. Nathaniel, I didn't expect. I thought you had disappeared. I thought so too. But some things, no matter how deep you bury them, eventually find their way back to the surface. Silence fell. Down the hallway, the sound of forks clinking on porcelain echoed faintly. Someone's heels clicked past. Everything felt distant, faded, except their gaze, which was real. I used to think. Maybe you hated me. For leaving without looking back. For choosing the scholarship. Leaving Montana without asking if you'd come too. Nathaniel shook his head, his voice deeper now but not bitter. I wasn't angry. Just sorry. Sorry I didn't fight harder to keep you. Sorry I thought love was strong enough to survive distance without needing words. A sigh slipped from Isabella's lips. Her hand gently braced the rough brick wall behind her. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but her voice stayed steady. If we hadn't met again tonight, would you have just lived the rest of your life never telling me what happened? Nathaniel was quiet, then nodded. You have everything. You're successful, respected, probably living the life you dreamed of. And me, I'm a technician surviving on overtime. What could I possibly bring into your life now? Isabella felt a lump form in her throat, as if something had fallen and couldn't find a place to land. And then she said just one thing, simple, but enough to reopen it all. You could bring what no one has in 20 years. You bring memory. A while later, as the backstage crew began dimming the hallway lights, Isabella slowly shrugged off her coat, as if shedding a layer of armor. She stepped closer and spoke softly. I didn't know you were still here, but now I do. And if you don't mind, I want to hear, I want to know how you've lived. Nathaniel looked at her again. His eyes filled with doubt, but there was a flicker, a tiny light, the kind you see in someone who's lived in darkness for too long, but never stopped yearning for the sun. Are you sure you want to hear it? Not everything is easy to listen to. Isabella nodded slowly, eyes locked on his. After 20 years, I don't need easy anymore. I need the truth. And so, these two people, once a part of each other, once lost to each other, sat down together on a cold step behind a luxurious hall under the spring night in Denver, and the old story began again, not where it had ended, but where it should have continued. Right after that birthday night, something shifted between them, deeper, quieter. Their conversations weren't just fillers of silence anymore. They became real questions, with real answers, that both had once been too afraid to face. One late afternoon in the courtyard of the hospital where Leona worked, Nathaniel came to pick her up after her shift. He showed up with a simple bouquet of white daisies, holding a cup of hot coffee, and wearing an expression that was both shy and determined like a boy on his first date. Leona, just finishing up a procedure in the treatment room, was startled to see him standing at the doorway. How long have you been standing there? She asked, wiping sweat from her forehead. Just got here, Nathaniel smiled, his eyes following her every movement as if he wanted to memorize all of it. They sat down on a stone bench in front of the rose garden, where the late sunlight filtered through thin branches and gently brushed Leona's shoulder. Leona, his voice was low, but steady. Have you ever wondered, if I hadn't left 20 years ago, how things would be now? Leona stayed quiet, her eyes fixed on a fallen petal at her feet. Then she slowly nodded. I did wonder, many times. In the first few years after you left, I thought about it every night, but life doesn't let you live in questions forever. I had to pay rent. I had to put food on the table. I had to teach myself to stop waiting for something that would never come back. Her answer landed like a small, precise blade, quietly cutting into Nathaniel's chest. He knew nothing could make up for it. But he said, I don't have a good reason for walking away like that. Only one truth. I was a coward. I thought I'd make it big, come back, take you with me. But I got pulled into another world where people measure worth by stock shares, by magazine covers, not by afternoons spent under a porch roof with someone you love. Leona turned to him. In her eyes was anger but also compassion. The kind of compassion reserved only for someone who had once hurt you to the very core. So why did you come back? She asked. The question wasn't harsh, wasn't soft, but it was clearly a line in the sand. Nathaniel took a breath, his hand instinctively tightening around the now cold coffee cup. Because for the first time in 20 years, I didn't recognize myself in anything I'd built. But when I saw you still standing, even though life hasn't been kind, still the woman who knows how to sacrifice, how to live right, how to be kind, I knew there's only one place I could ever call home. And that's with you. Leona looked down. Maybe she cried, but the evening breeze had already dried her tears. At the same time, in a room across the city, a man stepped out from the shadows and threw a file onto a table. "Who is she?" His voice laced with fury. His assistant bowed slightly. A nurse named Leona Moore, 43, single, works at East Ridge Community Hospital. The only person the CEO has appeared with in the past 2 months. The man's second largest shareholder in the corporation gripped the file tightly. He's risking both his image and his shares over some woman who used to wait tables? Fine. Let's see if this so-called emotional connection can hold up an empire. The story began to shift. It was no longer just a chance reunion. It became a quiet war between human value and social value. On one side was the woman once left behind, now facing a rekindled love, tangled with the fear of being hurt again. On the other, the man who had everything, now standing before the choice of losing it all to keep the one thing he lost 20 years ago. And what's the heart of the lesson here? Sometimes, forgiveness isn't about accepting the past, but giving the present a chance. Because some emotional bonds, when true enough, can save 2 people and the world behind them. That morning, Leona arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. The New York air was crisp. The wind sweeping through the long corridor made her light coat flutter behind her. Today, the hospital's new director, a well-known figure in the medical business world, was scheduled for a site visit. Rumor had it, this man had investments in major pharmaceutical groups and close ties to the board Nathaniel was part of. Leona didn't care much until she stepped into the morning briefing room and saw the man standing at the head of the table. It was Raymond Trent, Chief Financial Officer of Donovan Health Group, known for his firm belief that money is the core of modern healthcare. Raymond scanned the staff list, pausing at the name Leona Moore, head nurse, Department of Nursing. He didn't bother to hide the condescension in his voice when he asked, "Weren't you the one who used to mop floors at a restaurant in Brooklyn? And now you manage a whole department?" The room turned cold. Leona stood up, her voice calm but clear. "I've worked many jobs, Mr. Trent, including waiting tables, cleaning floors, babysitting, and even kitchen prep. But they all taught me something some people spend their whole lives never understanding. Kindness doesn't come with a title." Raymond smirked and turned to the head doctor. "Does she always talk like this?" The doctor didn't answer, only lowered his head. Leona walked out of the meeting before it ended. She was done with contempt. But deep inside, something had been challenged, and she knew this wasn't over. That afternoon, at a secret shareholder meeting, Raymond stood at the center, waving the same file. Nathaniel is letting emotions get in the way of business. He's slashing the PR budget to funnel funds into a community hospital. For who? A woman who once mopped hospital floors. He's dragging the Donovan brand to the bottom. Another shareholder cut in. He's doing a good job, reforming the hospital system, cutting out internal corruption. Raymond raised his hand to cut them off. Good or blinded? If we don't act now, we'll lose our control. I propose we call a vote on the CEO position at Donovan Health, and if necessary, investigate any personal relationships that may be influencing Nathaniel Donovan's executive decisions. No one objected. The power play had begun, and the first target, Leona Moore. That evening, as Leona was organizing files in her office, a colleague discreetly handed her an envelope. "I don't know who sent this, but be careful." Inside were photos taken from a distance of her and Nathaniel, her getting into his car, the 2 of them sitting by the river, embracing outside the hospital after a late shift. Along with them was a single piece of paper. Feelings don't equal competence. Those who know their place know when to step away. Leona didn't cry. She simply froze, not out of fear, but because, once again, the past had returned to test the fragile peace she'd barely begun to reclaim. The next day, Nathaniel showed up at the hospital. He didn't wear his usual calm expression. He pulled Leona into the staff break room, his voice urgent. "You're being followed. They're trying to use you to take me down." Leona sat down, her hands resting on her lap, eyes locked on his. "So, what do you want me to do? Leave you? Quit my job? Disappear so you can keep everything I supposedly don't belong to?" Nathaniel shook his head, quickly kneeling before her. "I don't want you to go anywhere, but I'm scared. Scared they'll hurt you. You don't deserve this." Leona smiled faintly, the smile of someone who's seen too much. "Nathaniel, I've been through enough to know not everyone gets to live an easy life. But if I walk away again, all those years I fought for dignity will mean nothing." She stood, stepped closer to him, and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. If they want to attack me because of my past, I'll use that very past to answer back. Because those who try to crush others with prejudice, no matter their title, will never make me bow. Nathaniel was silent. For the first time in his life, he realized the woman standing before him didn't need protection, she needed respect. Meanwhile, a freelance journalist was tracking suspicious investment trails tied to Raymond Trent, and she had just uncovered a lead involving tax evasion, money laundering, and price fixing on land acquisitions for hospitals in low-income areas. The storm was coming, but this time, not only were Leona and Nathaniel ready, truth was on their side too. 3 days later, while the media buzzed with whispers of a scandal involving the new CEO of Donovan Health, Leona stood alone at the window in the staff lounge, a cold cup of tea in her hands. Wind crept in through the cracked window, chilly, but strangely soothing, like a quiet reminder, you're still alive. She read a line from a tabloid site. Once a cleaner at second-rate restaurants, Leona Moore is now climbing fast thanks to a special relationship with Donovan Health Group's new CEO, Nathaniel Donovan. A textbook case of sleep your way into the right seat. Leona set the tea down, but her hands no longer trembled. She made a decision. She would not stay silent ever again. That afternoon, Leona sent an email to the entire executive board requesting permission to hold an internal staff meeting in the auditorium on behalf of the head nurse. The title of the event? Professional Ethics and Internal Equity. A staff development session. The reason sounded official. No one questioned it. When everyone arrived, from directors to department heads to nurses, Leona stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand. Her hair was neatly tied back. Her gaze didn't avoid anyone. Before we begin, I'd like to share something that wasn't in the original agenda. The room fell silent. Leona looked straight at Raymond, seated mid-row beside a few major shareholders. She began projecting images and documents onto the large screen. Records of her work as an emergency nurse during a hurricane in Florida, overnight shifts at a community clinic, her Employee of the Year award, and internal reviews from her medical peers. I've been a cleaner, a waitress at fast food joints. I've been unemployed, and I've also intubated a seizing 4-year-old during a hurricane night. So if anyone in this room believes my current position is thanks to any relationship outside of honest labor, let me be clear, you are wrong. Scattered applause echoed from the staff section. I don't need everyone to like me, but I want to remind you, don't use someone's background to determine their worth, and don't use privilege to turn another person's dignity into a weapon. The next slide appeared a video clip recorded from a prior shareholder meeting, where Raymond spoke about changing leadership because a woman didn't match the brand's vision. No one knew how the clip got out. Leona didn't explain, but she said, if you want a hospital chain made up only of people with spotless resumes and polished social media but empty hearts, then I don't belong here. She bowed. The room was still. Then applause broke out, this time, not in fragments, but all at once. Raymond stood, face cold as ice, and walked out of the auditorium. Nathaniel, seated quietly in the back, said nothing, but his eyes shimmered with pride. That night, Leona returned to her small apartment. On her table was an envelope with no name, just one handwritten line in blue ink. I used to think you weren't worthy of him, but today I understood. No one gets to decide who's worthy of whom except the people involved. I'm the reporter who once wrote about you. I'm going to publish the truth. Leona folded the letter and smiled faintly. On Monday morning, she walked into the hospital with a different energy. Not defensive, not combative, just present. Some eyes followed her with hesitation. Others gave her small nods, silent apologies left unsaid. She knew that by now, the video clip had circulated through Donovan Health's internal network. Her words, Raymond's frozen expression, it was all out there. She didn't know who had helped her get that recording, but deep down, she knew it could only have been Nathaniel. That afternoon, a message appeared on her phone, 7 p.m. tonight. Meeting room, 18th floor. I'll be waiting. Just one line. No flourish. No explanation. And at exactly 7, Leona stepped into the familiar conference room where, once upon a time, she'd first been offered tea as a colleague, not just a janitor. The lighting was soft. The scent of cinnamon drifted from a small candle on the table. Nathaniel stood by the window, looking out over the city. No suit this time, just a white shirt and cardigan, like he was trying to shed his CEO skin. When Leona walked up, he turned to her. That look, for the first time in years, held no guard, no logic, no calculation. I'm sorry, he said. for staying silent when you were attacked, for letting you fight alone. Leona started to say something that she didn't need him to be a hero, that strong women don't need saving, but instead, she simply shook her head. "It's not that I need you to protect me," she said. "I just need to know. I'm not being left behind." A pause, long enough for both to realize they were no longer who they had once been. Nathaniel stepped closer. "When I became CEO," he said, "they told me, from now on, every personal feeling is a threat. So I learned how to be correct, but never real." He looked into her eyes. "But since you came back, all that logic means nothing, because my heart never forgot you. And this time, even if I lose my title, my name, I'll still choose what you chose in that auditorium. The truth." Leona smiled, not the smile of a woman who once sat silently in the break room after being dragged through a tabloid, but the smile of someone who knows her worth, who knows that love isn't about surrendering, but standing side by side. Then, she said softly, "We choose each other, but not for who we were, for who we've become." 1 week later, at an emergency shareholder meeting, Raymond was officially dismissed due to ethical violations in personnel management. Additional recordings from other employees surfaced, reinforcing the truth. Leona was invited to speak at the meeting, but she declined. Instead, she sat in the back, quietly, beside Nathaniel. Because sometimes, victory doesn't mean standing at the podium. Sometimes, it just means sitting next to the one who went through the storm with you. 3 weeks after the shareholder meeting, the media storm surrounding Raymond had settled. The spotlight moved on to newer scandals, and the internal affairs of Donovan Healthcare began to stabilize. Though the overt hostility had faded, Leona still felt watched. In the elevator, in the cafeteria, down the office halls. The whispers weren't loud anymore, but they were quieter, sharper. On a Friday afternoon, while working with the internal communications team, Leona got a call from Nathaniel. "Tonight, 7. Are you free?" "I'm free," she replied without hesitation. "Come to my place for dinner." "My mother's there." Her heart skipped a beat. 6:45 p.m., Long Island. Leona stepped out of the taxi, clutching her handbag. Before her stood a white house surrounded by green lawns, warm yellow light spilling from French-style windows. It looked like a painting, but inside her, a quiet storm stirred. She'd imagined this moment, many times, but never thought it would actually come. Nathaniel met her outside, his expression softer than usual. "What did you tell her?" "I told her, you're the one I've waited for my whole life." Leona laughed, just a small laugh, unable to hide her nerves. Dinner was filled with more silence than conversation. Miss S. Eleanor Donovan, widow of a medical legend, was the kind of woman whose every glance held judgment. Every ring on her hand was more than jewelry. It was proof she belonged to a world Leona had never entered. "Miss Brooks," she said, setting her wine glass down after the appetizers, "Nathaniel is a man with responsibilities to his family and to his legacy. I trust you understand that." "Yes," Leona nodded. "I know it better than anyone. He once gave up parts of himself for it. And now," she continued, her gaze sharper, "I only hope this relationship isn't reactionary, a form of rebellion in response to workplace pressure." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation dressed in manners. Leona looked up, unflinching. "I don't represent rebellion. I'm just someone who once scrubbed the floors beneath your office hallway. And I love the man who stopped in the middle of all his power to see me." Under the table, Nathaniel reached for her hand. "Mom," he said, "I don't love Leona because she's different. I love her because she dares to be real in a world full of masks, and through her, I'm learning how to take off my own." Mrs. Eleanor was silent. Her face softened, not in agreement, but with the wrinkles of age, and something that looked like surrender. "Love," she sighed, "is supposed to elevate you, not turn you into someone you're not." "But Mom," Nathaniel replied gently, "the man I used to be was never truly happy." After dinner, Leona helped Eleanor clear the table. The two stood side by side in the quiet kitchen. The older woman placed the last glass into the dishwasher, then turned to Leona. "I used to be a nurse before I married Nathaniel's father. I know what it feels like to be seen as an outsider. And I also know that sometimes pride doesn't help you stand tall, it just stops you from walking through doors already open." Leona nodded, saying nothing. "I'm not ready to accept you, but I'm willing to watch. And if you're genuine with him, and with this family, then time will answer what I cannot." On the way home, Leona sat beside Nathaniel in the car. "Are you okay?" she asked. "No. But for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of not being okay." She tilted her head, resting it gently on his shoulder. Silence. Outside, the night sky was blank, no moon, no stars. But inside the small car, two people sat side by side, carrying old wounds and a new kind of hope, and somehow, it was enough light to see the road ahead. 2 weeks after the dinner in Long Island, the romantic story between CEO Nathaniel Donovan and internal communications staffer Leona Brooks officially hit the media. It began with just a few lines in an entertainment blog, exclusive. Nathaniel Donovan, handsome, successful CEO, and former Time cover feature at age 40, is reportedly dating a mystery woman. Sources say she previously worked in logistics. Within 48 hours, the story spread like a full-blown scandal. On Twitter X, fairy tale romance, or a PR strategy dressed in sentiment? It's cute a CEO falls for a janitor. But what's the endgame? When exactly did he fall in love? Before or after she stepped out of the uniform? On Facebook, inside groups like Successful Women Network and White Collar World, debates flared up. Emotions have no place in a professional environment. If it's real love, she should resign. Avoid conflicts of interest. This woman's clearly taking a shortcut to the top through her relationship. At Donovan Healthcare headquarters, the atmosphere wasn't much better. Leona was no longer just the girl from the content team, but the CEO's girlfriend. Every glance from receptionists to middle management held a mix of curiosity, jealousy, skepticism, and a fair share of contempt. In a strategic meeting, when Leona pitched a proposal to improve the hospital's communication efficiency, the head of HR looked at her and said with a smirk, "Great idea. I'm sure Nathaniel will love it. Might get approved in 5 minutes." Chuckles rippled through the room. Leona stayed silent. But inside, a cold ache spread. Not because they mocked her, but because people she once considered colleagues now saw her as little more than office gossip. Nathaniel noticed. That Tuesday afternoon, he waited for her downstairs as usual. But when she got in the car, he wasn't smiling like he usually did. "I just got a recommendation from Global PR," he said. "They're asking that we avoid appearing together publicly at internal events." For now, Leona nodded. She wasn't surprised, just tired. "I understand, Leona." He reached for her hand. "I don't want to hide you, but I also can't watch the media tear you apart." "It's not hiding," she said quietly. "It's protecting. Protecting what we have from being defined by people who don't understand it." That night, back in her worn-down Brooklyn apartment, Leona opened her phone and scrolled through comments on a post by a respected trade publication. If she's really that good, why has no one heard of her before? Another office romance turned hiring bias? "I've worked in PR. People like her play the humble underdog card to climb faster." She threw her phone onto the bed, her face pale. For the first time in years of holding herself up, she felt truly exhausted. She stepped into the bathroom, turned on the tap and let cold water wash over her face like she was trying to erase the memory of the day. But it couldn't wash away the feeling that she was losing herself, just trying to justify something that should have needed no defense at all. The next morning, Donovan Healthcare was met with quiet shock. Leona had submitted her resignation. No explanation, no tears, just a short, polite, and painfully rational note. "I'm grateful for the opportunity to have worked here, but it's time for me to reclaim my worth somewhere that isn't attached to anyone else but myself." She left the building at exactly 4 p.m., head held high, her smile still intact, but her eyes no longer belonged to that place. At that same moment, on the 27th floor, Nathaniel was mid-presentation in a shareholder meeting. His assistant stepped in and handed him his phone. One message, "She's gone." He froze mid-sentence. Eyes locked on the screen. His chest tightened, not because he'd lost an employee, but because, for the first time, he understood what it felt like to be left behind, after letting the one you love stand alone for too long. 3 days after Leona left, Donovan Healthcare moved on as if nothing had happened. No one mentioned her. No one asked. It was as if all traces of Leona had been erased, except for one thing, the silent, brooding look in Nathaniel's eyes, from morning until night. Margaret, his longtime assistant, would occasionally glance at him through the glass office door. He sat there, in front of his laptop, but his fingers didn't move, his eyes didn't read. Only the coffee cup by his side cooled with the passing hours, like the regret quietly steeping in his heart. That evening, Nathaniel went home early. His penthouse apartment, once filled with warm lights, jazz music, and dinners they cooked together, was now quiet. Too quiet. He opened the fridge, took out a bottle of wine, poured a glass, but didn't drink. He just stood there, leaning against the kitchen counter, staring out the large window where the lights from the Brooklyn Bridge flickered in his eyes, and remembered the way she'd sit reading by the window, the sound of her laugh whenever he told some ridiculous story. The first time she stepped into this apartment, eyes lit up like a child stepping into a fairy tale. "I didn't think it would go this far," he muttered, like a confession to no one but himself. Across the city, Leona was moving into a smaller, older apartment. Not because she needed to save money. The final paycheck Nathaniel had sent was enough to live comfortably for a while, but because she wanted to start again, somewhere no one knew her as the CEO's ex-girlfriend. She re-enrolled in night classes and began volunteering for a nonprofit that taught communication skills to immigrant women. The job was unpaid, but for the first time in years, Leona felt like her soul could breathe. Still, every night before bed, she'd scroll through old photos on her phone, candid shots of Nathaniel cooking dinner, the two of them in the elevator, his hand holding hers in a crowd. She hadn't deleted a single one, not because she was still hoping, but because she wasn't ready to let go. 1 week passed, then 2. Nathaniel didn't call. Leona didn't either. There are silences people choose not to break up, but to find out what the other will do when they're no longer being held on to. Week 3. Nathaniel showed up unexpectedly at one of the nonprofit skill workshops. No warning, no flowers, no apologies dressed in poetry. He simply stood at the back of the room, watching her teach a group of Latina women how to speak professionally on the phone. His eyes followed her every gesture, every way she adjusted her tone to fit each learner, the patience in how she corrected their and our sounds, like she wasn't just teaching, but truly listening. And he understood she didn't need him to stand tall. She didn't need him to be whole, but he needed her to remember who he was and what he once believed in. After the session, Leona spotted him. She froze in the doorway. Their eyes met. No words, no possessive gestures, just the look of two people who had walked through 3 weeks of silence and still chose to look toward each other. "You still teach as well as the first day I heard you speak in that conference room," Nathaniel said, voice low, eyes steady on hers. Leona gave a small smile, gentle, like an exhale. "And you still know the exact right time to show up," she replied, not as a reproach, but as an admission. "I still hold space for you." They didn't kiss, they didn't hug, no grand declarations. But when Nathaniel handed her a printed schedule with one date circled in red, Frontline Staff Training Program, next month, Donovan Healthcare, and below, a signature from the executive board with the title, Program Led, Leona Brooks, she looked up at him, speechless. "You're not coming back as my girlfriend. You're coming back because you're brilliant. And the company needs that," he said, eyes softening. "And us," he paused, "we'll keep going, if you'll let us." Leona didn't answer, but when she folded the page and tucked it into her bag, that was already a yes. Monday morning, 8 a.m., sharp. Leona walked through the glass doors of Donovan Healthcare wearing a new badge clipped to her shirt. Leona Brooks, frontline training specialist. No one looked at her like the girl who once mopped floors. No one dared whisper the CEO's ex, because the way she walked in demanded respect. Steady, professional, self-assured. She didn't wear a dress. She wore a plain white shirt, charcoal gray trousers, and flat shoes. No jewelry, no elaborate makeup. But when she greeted the doorman, the same elderly man who had once seen her scrubbing hallway tiles, her voice carried enough confidence that he nodded back like greeting a senior colleague. Upstairs, Nathaniel wasn't waiting in his office. He held his meetings on time, ran his projects as usual. No flowers, no notes saying "you look amazing today," because he knew she didn't come back for him. She came back for herself, and he, if he still wanted a place in her life, would have to earn it by honoring that. Morning briefing, conference room, 3rd floor. Leona stood in front of the screen, presenting a new internal training program for nurses and patient intake staff, people who had rarely received formal soft skills coaching. No fancy slides, but clear, thoughtful content. Her voice steady, precise, and firm. At the far end of the table, Nathaniel sat in silence, eyes on her, unmoving. Margaret, still his loyal assistant, tilted her head toward him and smiled slightly. She didn't need to say it. Everyone could tell that wasn't just a look of leadership. After the meeting, a few younger staffers shyly approached Leona. "Miss Leona, we heard you used to work somewhere else before transferring here. How did you get through that first phase?" She looked at them not with superiority, not like a teacher, just someone who understood. You don't survive the early days by proving yourself to others. You get through it by listening to yourself and staying patient. The response made them nod like someone had finally handed them the key they didn't know they were missing. That evening, as Leona stepped out of the building, Nathaniel was waiting by the entrance. No fancy car, just standing there, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly tousled from the wind. "Dinner?" he asked, voice light. "I'm not hungry," she shrugged. "Then just a walk. Don't worry, no agenda. It's just, I've been quiet for 8 hours today, and I could really use the sound of your voice." Leona let out a soft laugh, a laugh no longer guarded. "All right, but no more than 30 minutes. I've got a class at 7 tomorrow. 30 minutes. With me around, you'll feel time fly faster." They walked together, past streets glowing with soft yellow light, the hum of people around them, and the smell of grilled pizza from a nearby food cart. No need for many words. Just a silence, safe enough for two people to exist beside each other, not for the past, not for the future, but for this moment now. "What did you think about today?" Leona asked, eyes still looking forward. "I think the woman standing on that platform this morning is no longer the woman I once dated. She's someone I want to build something lasting with. Maybe not right away, but if you'll let me." Leona stayed quiet for a while, then exhaled soft, like setting a burden down. "I think so too." About 2 weeks later, Leona officially stepped into her new role leading training for the nursing team at Branch 5, a recently acquired site in Brooklyn under Donovan Healthcare. The workload was heavy, the pressure real, but she liked it that way. The busier she was, the more alive she felt, not just existing living. Every morning, she woke early, scarfed down an egg sandwich, checked her training schedule, and took the bus to the branch. She declined a private car, despite being offered one. She only came to HQ when necessary. And she didn't see Nathaniel as often anymore. Strangely, that made their relationship stronger. One Saturday evening, as Leona was editing lesson materials at home, her phone rang. Not Nathaniel, a number she didn't recognize. "Miss Brooks, this is Mia, the head nurse at the Brooklyn branch. I'm so sorry to call over the weekend, but I think you should know something." Leona heard the slight tremble in Mia's voice. Her instincts kicked in a familiar sharp feeling. Something's wrong. "Go ahead." "This afternoon, a major investor came by for an unannounced inspection. They said, we've been accused of falsifying medical training records, and they asked to meet with the person responsible for staff training. I recorded the session. They claimed someone forged certifications." For a moment, Leona felt a chill down her spine. "And whose name did they say is on the record?" "Yours." The next morning, Leona showed up at the Donovan Healthcare headquarters. She walked in herself. No appointment, no call to Nathaniel, no message through Margaret. The first need to speak to the legal department. The receptionist hesitated, but Leona's gaze left no room for refusal. 15 minutes later, she was seated in a conference room with two in-house attorneys. The documents they handed her made her freeze. An internal report had leaked, naming her as the approver of a list of trained personnel, at least 6 of whom had never attended a class but held certificates. Leona clenched her hands tightly. "I never signed off on any of this. All my approvals go through the system with timestamps, locations, and digital signatures." One of the lawyers, a young, sharp, and fair woman, nodded. "We know. But your name is on the print record. And if this escalates to an external investigation, it could damage your professional reputation and your current relationship with the CEO." That final line cut clean, cold, and exact. That night, Nathaniel stood at her doorstep. Light rain, his coat damp, holding a paper bag with her favorite spicy noodles inside. "I heard." Leona stood still for a moment, then opened the door and stepped aside. He entered, set the food down, didn't rush to speak. At last, Leona looked up. "Do you believe me?" It wasn't an accusation, just a test of trust. Nathaniel didn't answer right away. He looked her in the eye, then walked over and pulled a USB drive from his coat pocket. "This is a system log from the past 3 months, pulled by Internalit. It proves who accessed your name and forged the digital signature." Leona blinked. "How did you get this?" Nathaniel gave a dry smile. "I'm the CEO, and I'm your partner. What I need to know is the truth." But the truth, as they would soon discover, wasn't exactly comforting. The data revealed that the person behind the forged records was someone Leona had trusted deeply, a senior training lead from the Queen's branch who had once mentored her when she first joined the company. The reason? Bitter, simple, and sharp jealousy, because Leona was favored, chosen, and a former janitor who climbed above me. Eventually, after a closed-door executive meeting, the matter was cleared. The real perpetrator was held accountable. Leona's reputation was restored, but the sting of being doubted even for a moment left a small scar. One quiet night, under the dim yellow kitchen light, Leona asked Nathaniel, if the truth hadn't come out, if the company had chosen to stay silent, what would you have done? Nathaniel didn't hesitate. I would have resigned and walked away with you. Leona smiled not because of the words, but because his voice didn't sound romantic. It sounded like a grown man making a promise. About 2 months later, just as Donovan Healthcare was recovering from the internal scandal, another crisis hit, this time from the outside. A non-profit organization accused the clinic system of denying treatment to uninsured patients. The media pounced. Headlines screamed, "Inhumane, abandoning the poor." Emotionless CEO Nathaniel didn't hide. He held a press conference, appeared on television. And that night, during a live interview, the host asked a question that silenced the studio. "Mr. Donovan, considering the background of the woman you're dating, a former janitor in your own system, do you think this relationship is genuine or just image building?" Nathaniel paused. His eyes held the camera, but it was clear he was looking through the lens towards someone watching quietly from afar. "I'm not building an image, I'm building a future with her." That night, Leona turned off the TV, quietly, and cried, not because of his answer, but because she knew those words would pull them both into the storm. And they did. The next morning, social media exploded in debate. Some mocked CEO dates the janitor. Others were moved. A love story that breaks class barriers. But the more famous you are, the easier it is to be targeted. And this time, Leona was the target. She received anonymous emails, threats. One day, she opened her locker in HR and found a paper with bold black letters, "Enough. Give the position back to someone who deserves it." A few days later, at a high-level strategic board meeting, one of the senior members, a longtime shareholder from the company's early days, spoke up. "Nathaniel, we understand you believe in love, but this company can't gamble on your personal life. It's time to choose, continue as CEO, or..." The sentence didn't finish, but it didn't have to. Everyone understood. Leona wasn't in the boardroom, but she knew everything, because Margaret had quietly called her after the meeting. That evening, Nathaniel sat in Leona's apartment, not a penthouse, no private car, no meetings, just the two of them. An old wooden table, a pot of warm tea. Leona placed her hand over his. "They're backing you into a corner. I can't let you give up everything because of me." Nathaniel looked at her, a long, steady gaze. "No blame, no defense. I'm not giving it up for you. I'm choosing for myself, because I can't continue running a company if I can't be honest within it, but I can let go if it helps you keep everything you've built." This time, Nathaniel's eyes dimmed slightly. "The question is, Leona, if you let go, would you still be yourself?" The next morning, Nathaniel submitted his resignation. He stepped down as CEO. No press conference. No heartfelt post on social media. Just one line, sent to the board. A healthcare company cannot heal others when it harbors prejudice at its core. Some were shocked. Some were relieved. Most stayed silent. A week later, Leona received an invitation for an interview from a community health organization, one she had applied to 2 years earlier, without ever getting a reply. This time, the invitation came from their new director, Nathaniel Donovan. No one knew what the future would hold. But from that moment on, they were no longer the CEO and the janitor, or the nurse and the boss. They were simply two people who had been through enough to understand when someone gives up power to hold on to another, it's no longer just love, it's trust. 3 years later, an autumn afternoon settled gently over a quiet community hospital on the outskirts of Boston. Yellow leaves carpeted the yard. The scent of dry grass, disinfectant, and rich coffee mingled in the sleeves of Leona's white coat, familiar as breath. She was now a senior coordinator, no longer mopping floors, no longer waiting quietly on the sidelines. She passed down a hallway and stopped outside the last room, where a free clinic session was being held for unhoused patients. Inside, Nathaniel was listening attentively to an elderly man talk about chronic back pain, a worn-out pen in his hand. No laptop, no assistant, just a doctor, listening. When their eyes met through the window pane, both smiled. No words were needed. That evening, in the small rented home near the river, no smart air conditioning, no automatic blinds, Nathaniel was fixing the wobbly leg of a table while Leona cooked chicken soup, the kind he'd loved back in college. Tomorrow, I have a meeting with the City Health Council. Still trying to get that mobile care funding approved. Yeah, maybe they'll say yes this time. If not, I'll try again. Leona ladled the soup into bowls, blowing gently. Slow and steady, huh? Nathaniel looked at her. Slow and steady, like a promise. They didn't return to luxury. They didn't launch a new company. They didn't end up on magazine covers. But they went together, through makeshift clinics, through mental health counseling for undocumented immigrants, through long, wearying budget meetings for underserved regions. Their love wasn't loud, but it was unshakable. One quiet Sunday night, as Leona was reviewing medical charts, Nathaniel walked into the kitchen holding a small box. "You once said to wait until everything was stable," he began. "But I've realized, waiting for life to be stable before loving is the most foolish thing we humans ever invented." Leona looked up. "I didn't want to propose when I was a CEO. I didn't want to do it when I felt like I had nothing left either. I want to marry you now when we're both just ourselves. No more, no less." She didn't say anything, just smiled, that smile both trembling and clear. Like a permanent yes. They didn't throw a grand wedding, just a small backyard gathering where fellow nurses, doctors, janitors, and ambulance drivers raised plastic cups like an unofficial family. The elderly woman who had been Leona's first patient at the center gave them a hand-embroidered cloth to remind you, true love isn't proven in wealth, but in poverty that didn't make you walk away. And finally, no one called them the janitor and her former boss. They were simply two people who chose a road that wasn't easy, wasn't quick, but was full of dignity, kindness, and trust. Sometimes you don't need someone who arrives with flowers and promises. You just need someone who stays when all the good things are gone and all the real things are just beginning.